Hey guys, Telegram Sam here. If you already know, I have an Instagram. It's Telegram _ Sam _ vinyl. So if you're on Instagram, check me out on there. But in today's video, we're doing a recent vinyl pickups where I show you guys the things I've gotten these last 3 weeks because I didn't do one last week because I did the video with my mom. Thank you to everyone's nice, sweet comments. My mom always loves doing these videos. She's gotten really into the vinyl community ever since I started making videos. And yeah, she gets a hoot out of it. So thank you guys. But yeah, let's get into it. First, let's start off with the 7 inches. First off, we have this 7-inch Rock and Roll Weirdos by Layla and the Snakes. This is original 1978 US press. I've described this as like rock, little new wave. This was just something I saw. I was like, I have to get it and see what it is at my local record store. This was the only release from this female group, and the best way I can describe the music is like Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's like campy rock and roll, almost to an excess. I mean, it's fun. It's not like the most groundbreaking, amazing thing I've heard, but it's just like a fun rock album. Like I said, you have Rock and Roll Weirdos on the first side, and the B side is Pyramid Power. So cool little find. And next up, another thing I kind of just was like, that looks interesting, I'll buy it. This is Experiments by Harvey Gold. Again, original 1978 US press. Sort of experimental pop rock with a little bit of a prog element to it. The A side is a cover of John Cale's I Keep a Close Watch, and then the B side is called Armadillo, which is a original composition by Harvey Gold. I actually really like the B side more than the A side. A side is alright, but Armadillo, that's the killer track on here. And the ending is just so cool. It kind of sounds like the song is almost melting and like transforming. Like I kind of don't know how to explain it besides like someone taking a lighter to like an acetate and like recording that. Like it's just such an interesting, weird sound, and I just really love the experimentation on this 7-inch. And again, this was the only release that Harvey Gold ever did, but this one just came on a clone. Can't see that really, but it's Silver Clone Records label. I guess this was a label back in the 70s in Akron, Ohio. Oh, and I didn't show the one for Layla and the Snakes, but Layla and the Snakes came on this ASP Snake green label. And this one, again, I wasn't familiar with this group, but because it's on the Sub Pop Singles sleeve, I had to get it. This is Loretta backed with Hybrid Moments by the Lazy Cowgirls. Original 1989 US press. I would describe this as like punk rock, garage. Loretta is a song that was originally done by the Nervous Eaters, and Hybrid Moments is obviously a cover of the Misfits song. But this was the 11th release in the first ever volume of the Sub Pop Singles Club, so that's really cool. But yeah, I really dig the Lazy Cowgirls. It's funny because now that I have this, I saw like, I think like all of Mark's Records posts a whole bunch of his Lazy Cowgirls albums on Instagram. I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to check them out. But this one just came on clear vinyl. Alright, now into the long plays. I am so excited to finally have a copy of this movie soundtrack. This was a very formative movie for me. This is the soundtrack to the movie Juno. I love this movie. This is definitely like a top 10 movie for me. I just love the weird lingo, and just like the dialogue in it is so amazing. It has great music. You have the Kinks, Buddy Holly, a lot of songs by Kimya Dawson, Belle and Sebastian, Sonic Youth, Antsy Pants, The Moldy Peaches, which I believe Kimya Dawson was in, The Velvet Underground, Cat Power, Mott the Hoople. Just like such a killer comp of like early 2000s like folk alternative music, and then also like throwbacks to some older alternative music. It's just so great. And actually, Juno is where I first heard about the Stooges. There's a scene in the movie where she's talking about her 5 favorite bands, which I think were Patti Smith, The Runaways, Velvet Underground, Talking Heads, I think. But one of them I definitely know was the Stooges, because that was the only band in the 5 she listed off that I didn't recognize. I was like, the Stooges, like the Three Stooges, and it popped up a crazy picture of Iggy Pop, doing his Iggy Pop thing, and I was like, I have to see what this is. And that's how I discovered the Stooges, and that's how they became my all-time favorite band. And I really owe that to this movie. And it also got me into Sonic Youth and just so many great alternative bands that I wasn't familiar with before. So love this movie, love the soundtrack, and this is an original 2007 U.S. press. So really stoked to have that. And this one just came on a custom label. Next up, we have Nilsson Sings Newman by Harry Nilsson. This originally came out in 1970, and this is a 1973 U.S. press. I've described this as, rock, pop music. This was Harry Nilsson's 5th studio album, and I just love Harry Nilsson. He's just one of those artists, anytime I see anything from him, I always have to buy it, and I didn't have this one yet, so had to get it. And this is a very simply composed album. There's not a lot of instrumentation on it, and most of the instrumentation on this album was actually done by Randy Newman himself. So really love this album. It's just a great, sort of chill vibe album. Love it. Love anything by Harry Nilsson. And I need to get some Randy Newman in the collection too. And this one just came on the orange RCA Victor label. And this one, I've been kind of going through a sort of Asian pop thing lately, where, I don't know, I'll just find random stuff from the 60s, 70s, and 80s by all these Asian pop artists, and I'll just go down a rabbit hole. And I saw this and it looked really cool, and it's in really great shape. This is Sunflowers Chapter 7 by Bao Nana. I had to Google translate both of those things, so I hope that's correct. But this is an original 1971 Taiwanese press of this great pop vocal, and a lot of the guitars on here sound very surfy to me. But this was her 7th studio album. This is sung in Mandarin Chinese. And she was a very popular Taiwanese artist back in the 60s and 70s. From Discogs, it looks like her last album she put out was in 1978. So she was around, and I think her first album was 1968. So she was around for about 10 years. According to Discogs, I guess she stopped making albums after that. But really, really great vocal. I think if you're interested in getting into this whole Asian pop, retro pop thing, you would really dig her music. It's very simple. It's not, there's some of it that can get very repetitive, and her vocals and just also the instrument arrangement on it is just really great. And it just came on this Lyco. Obviously it's all in Chinese, so I have no idea what the names of any of the songs are, but it's just really cool, and I always love getting into different international music, especially pop music. It's so interesting to hear what was popular for those specific countries during those certain times. Yeah, it's just really cool, and just a history lesson, I feel. Next up is a Paper Mache Dream Balloon by King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. This originally came out in 2015. This is a 2021 US press. This is the extended release that they did for it. It has this really cool lenticular cover where it's kind of 3D a little bit. But yeah, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, I feel, are the modern day Grateful Dead. They just released so many albums, and every album is so different. I would describe this as a garage psych acoustic album. This album was recorded with mostly entirely acoustic instruments, which is very different from them. They're very heavy sort of psych rock band, but then they've also done like straight up metal albums, and they just kind of go everywhere. I've even heard some songs that kind of just sound like straight up pop songs. Like they're just one of those bands that just do a little bit of everything. But yeah, I've been kind of getting more interested in them lately, and I just saw this there for a really cheap price, so I got it. And I really dig it. It's a really great album, and this was their 7th studio album. And this version came with just a regular version of the album with on sort of this like aqua green vinyl. And then the second one here is just the instrumentals of the songs. It came on this really cool like pinkish lavender vinyl. I really like the instrumental actually. I almost didn't buy it just because it had the instrumental. I just really don't gravitate to most of that stuff, but this is like a very chill, like I can imagine like if I ever threw a party throwing this on, and it would really like set the vibe to like a very chilled, cool like 60s thing. Next up, one I just kind of took a gamble on. It just looked really cool, and I read some of the titles of the songs. It just sounded interesting, but this is some cocktail suggestions by Mahogany Brain. This is a 2005 French press, and I would describe this as like art rock, experimental, noise rock. This was their 3rd and last album so far. They haven't released anything ever since this album, and this was the first album they released after a 30-year gap. I think the last release before this one was in 1976. But I guess Mahogany Brain are quite an influential sort of art rock, noise rock band from France. And yeah, I just saw like the song titles on here called like Junkie Room, Ultimate Soul Killer, Strange Apartments, Perilous Seas. I don't know, it just looked interesting. Definitely something I wouldn't normally gravitate to, but it's definitely an interesting listen, and it's not like too art rock and experimental that makes it like unbearable to listen to. It's still very listenable, and it's a very like sort of beginner album I would recommend if you're trying to get into some noise rock, art rock stuff. So yeah, cool album that you can find for pretty cheap. And this one just had custom labels. This one again is something that just looked too cool to pass up. This is Trans-Dimensional Space Window by Spencer Bearfield, Anthony Holland, and Tanai Tabal Trio. This is an original 1982 US press. I would describe this as jazz, free jazz. This was the only release from this group, and it's just such a, I mean, how could you pass up on this killer cover? And I mean, the title alone sells it. But yeah, very like spacey jazz. All of the song, I think there's only 2 songs on each side. They're both, all the songs are like 10 minutes long, but just such a killer, especially like the B side, which is almost like these chapters of songs in one song. It's just killer, and I just like don't know how to explain it. And it also has a bit of like a sort of Middle Eastern, African sort of drum beats and guitar. The guitar player on here, Spencer Bearfield, is killer. He shreds on this thing, and yeah, I just cannot recommend it enough. You can find these for like $15-$20 if you ever see it and you're interested in that sort of sound. Check it out. And this one just came on a WM label. And next up, for the things people have sent me, I cannot say thank you enough to Ilya. He sent me, he had a spare copy of his Mo-Fi pressing of In-A-Gadda-Da-Via, which he sent me a while back, which was so nice. But I mentioned how this is an album I've been looking for a very long time, pretty much since I've been collecting records, since I was 12 or 13. I've just never found it, or at least in a condition or a price that I've been willing to spend for it. And he was like, hey, I have a copy of this. I don't really listen to MC5. Do you want it? And I was like, yeah. And he was just so nice and so generous and sent this to me. I still can't believe I have this. I cannot say thank you enough. This is an original 1969 US Press, uncensored, of Kick Out the Jams by the MC5. I cannot tell you how long I've been looking for this record, how much I've been wanting this record. I just, I cannot say thank you enough. I just cannot believe I have this in my hands right now. And it's the gatefold that has the whole thing by John Sinclair in it, which I think was also exclusive to the original uncensored releases of this album. For those of you who don't know the history of this, there's a song on here called Kick Out the Jams that has the opening line, "Kick out the jams, motherfucker." And a lot of parents were very angry about that, so they ended up changing all of the releases after this to "Kick Out the Jams, brothers and sisters," and but the uncensored version is where it's at. That's usually the one everyone wants. But yeah, just such a killer first album from them, a live album. Just such a seminal band and seminal album to the coming punk movement that would happen several years later. And I mean, it's so weird because I've listened to this album a lot on YouTube, so you get used to that digital sound of it. But when you hear Kick Out the Jams on vinyl the way you're supposed to hear it, it's like it goes from being an ant to Godzilla. Like, it just completely opens up the sound, and you just want to like break stuff. It just gets you to like, I just could not imagine what being at this concert was like and hearing that song and just getting so riled up and like just but the album in its entirety is amazing also, but that song is just, it's so seminal and just so important to what was to come in the 70s. And just, God, I love this album. I love this band. Them and the Stooges are just one of my all-time favorite bands from the great Detroit scene that was happening during that time. And I just cannot say thank you enough to Ilya. This is just too kind and generous, and just thank you. And it came on the Red Electra label, the Biggie. And then these next three albums I got from Christian, aka the CGC Vinyl Guy. He has a great YouTube channel, and I'll link it down below if you're not familiar with him. But he sent me Live at Leeds by The Who. This originally came out in 1970, and this is a 1980 US Press. Great hard rock, blues rock, if for some reason you're not familiar with The Who. This was their first live album, and the only live album they released during the time they had all of the original members and, you know, at the peak of their popularity. But God, this is such a killer live album. I mean, The Who are one of those bands I always kind of take for granted. I'm like, yeah, my generation, like all the hits. But then when you hear some of their other stuff, you're like, God, they're just such a great band, and they just had some of the greatest musicians ever in rock music all in one band. They do a great cover of Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, "Shakin' All Over." I love that song, and I love when people cover that song. And Pete Townsend just does a nasty guitar riff throughout it. Just love it. And this one just came on the Rainbow MCA Records label. Next up, an album I have been looking for a while, but it's so hard to find them in really great condition, and this one is just fantastic. This is This Year's Model by Elvis Costello. This is original 1970 US Press. Great new wave rock album. This was his second studio album, and this was also produced by Nick Lowe, who is just a genius of the entire post-punk, late 70s, early 80s new wave scene in Britain. And this was the first album where Elvis had the Attractions as his backing band. I wouldn't say this trumps My Aim Is True as my favorite Elvis Costello album, but just such an essential album to have from his discography, and it's still a killer album and still such an important album in the whole late 70s new wave post-punk scene in Britain. Just a great album. And this is the Columbia Records red label, but instead of Columbia, it has Costello around the label, which I guess some of them had this, some of them didn't, and kind of just depended on what press you got during 1978. But yeah, that was super cool thing to have. And last but not least, just a great killer album by one of the greatest hard rock bands ever, Women and Children First by Van Halen. This is original 1980 US press. Great killer hard rock, a little metal at sometimes. But I have this on cassette, but I didn't have this on vinyl yet. And this was their third studio album. And just, God, like, what can you say about Van Halen? They're so killer. I'm personally a David Lee Roth girl all the way. Even though I was named after Sammy Hagar, I cannot stand the Hagar version of Van Halen. It's just not the same to me. And it's funny because my mom loves Sammy Hagar and his era with Van Halen, and I'm very much the opposite. To me, there's no Van Halen without David Lee Roth, and especially now that Eddie's gone, there just can't be anyone to replace Eddie Van Halen. And yeah, just such a killer album. Again, one of those bands I kind of take for granted. I won't listen to them for a while, and then I'll throw on something by them. I'm like, God, they're so killer. Why don't I listen to them more? You have And the Cradle Will Rock on here. Loss of Control, Everybody Wants Some as the last track. Such a great end track. But on Could This Be Magic, Nicolette Larson, who was a great sort of adult contemporary sort of pop singer during the 70s, and she famously worked with Neil Young and provided backing vocals on some of his albums, is the only female singer to ever lend her voice to a Van Halen song. She sings on Could This Be Magic, and on her debut solo album from 1978, which I actually have somewhere in here, Eddie Van Halen actually plays guitar uncredited on one of the songs on her debut album. So that's kind of a little fun fact from this album. And this one just came on the classic 80s Warner Brothers label. But this unfortunately doesn't have the great poster that I think it's like David Lee Roth like chained to a fence or something. I would die to find that poster. But anyways, thank you so much, Christian, for sending me those 3 records. So stoked to have them. But yeah, that was all I got these last 3 weeks, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.